Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. Today I would like to present you Mr. Halesov, and he is a quite well-known expert on the subject of 9/11. And it will be also very important for us to find out more of who he is, but I think it will be better done by himself. So, Mr. Kalsov, why are you an expert on 9/11?
Hmm. You want me to speak English? So it will be in English.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Because I thought that it will be in Russian. Okay. Um, in uh, in the 2007, uh, means 15 years ago already, I was the first person who published my explanation of the mechanics of the destruction of the Twin Towers, which was which became popularly known as nuclear demolition of the World Trade Center. And why I came to actually I would put it this way: I was the first person, I mean, from publicly known people who provided satisfactory explanation on how to reduce the steel into a steel dust, because as you probably know, the twin towers were instantly reduced to fluffy microscopic dust. This means they were just a steel structure, and in a split of a second they were turned to dust, which allowed the undamaged tops of the twin towers to fall down at almost free fall speed. And I was actually many people rake their brains trying to figure out the explanation, but none of them before me was able to provide any satisfactory explanation. So I was the first. So I explained the mechanics of how to do that, and that actually made me famous. In 2007, I published my first book as a textbook, and in 2010 I published my video with a detailed explanation with the graphics, and it was in the form of interview of mine by someone. But that was also together with the graphic, with some documentary footage and so on. So that video ran almost 4 hours. Initially it was 26 series, 10 minutes each. So 260 minutes total. And this video used to explain everything from beginning to end. So at that time, as you probably know, the censorship on YouTube was not as strict as today. And those days it was very hard to get your video banned in YouTube. But my video was banned in YouTube in 2010. So in a couple of days, it managed to accumulate maybe more than 100,000 views. And the growth was so rapid that it was obvious that in another 2 days it will be over 1 million. At that time, YouTube banned my video, and actually that video became even more popular after the ban, because if they did not ban it, the people might not fully believe in it. But once you see the YouTube banned it, and also it was banned not only in YouTube and Facebook and in many other similar platforms. So then that triggered the public interest, and that explanation became very popular. So that is just like the story for uh, how it was, and how I arrived to this particular conclusion. That how I explained that. That is very simple, because in my younger age, I used to be a military officer in
Mm-hmm.
a special control service of the Soviet Army. And this Soviet Special Control Service was a special organization that was designed to detect nuclear explosions, including the underground nuclear explosions. And while I was serving there, it was in the 80s, it came to my knowledge that under the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York, there was a special, what they call it, I go by Russian name of it. I don't know if that was really called in English so or not. But in Russian, it sounded like emergency nuclear demolition scheme of the Twin Towers.
For our viewers, especially who are in US and also those from Europe, I think it would be useful to remind that quite a lot of buildings, for example, built in Las Vegas, they also have certain key areas which are from the beginning made in such fashion that it would be easier to demolish them. And I bet most of you have seen those huge explosions, which you can see more or less on a regular basis in Las Vegas when they take down some huge, very massive buildings. There maybe they're of course they're not nearly as tall as Twin Towers were, but they're also very massive. And we also have to keep in mind that quite a few nations, even in Europe, although not for the same type of purposes, but because of the military purposes, before construction, already on the level of schematics, they're putting in a certain voids, for example, into bridges constructed so that you could get rid of them immediately. So it would be, you would need a very small amount of explosive, and it will be very easy to make structural damage. A lot of those constructions, for example, are made from Finland, close to Russian border. So the things that Mikhail is talking about, they will be definitely quite familiar for lots of you who have been ever involved in some sort of major construction or architecture. And I think even if you are interested in such subjects, you would also probably read about it because it's written on the subject quite extensively, and it's becoming more and more interesting now because of the events which have happened, let's say, between Russia and Ukraine. So there are a lot of more people thinking about constructing buildings in such a way, and constructing especially infrastructure in Europe in such a way that it can be easily demolished. Now back to you, Mikhail.
Oh, it's okay. Let me try to explain what I know about it. Okay, when I was a military officer in the 80s in the Soviet Special Control Service, I knew about the existence of the nuclear demolition scheme under the Twin Towers. The Building 7 was not built yet, so we are talking only about the Twin Towers then. But I did not know much details about it, and I didn't even know why it should be there. So I had no explanation. I just knew it as a fact. Okay, but when after 9/11, I decided to make my own research and to explain to the people how it worked. I mean, how technically you can use an underground nuclear explosion to transform steel to dust, and in the same time to avoid all typical destructive factors of the nuclear explosion, which are in the brains of the people is associated with an atmospheric nuclear explosion, not the underground one. So firstly, I concentrated on the technical points of it. And then when I published my first research, I was contacted by lots of people from all over the world, and some of them were architects from United States and also from Japan, strangely enough. And these people explained to me actually why that kind of things must exist under the Twin Towers. The problem is that in the United Nations, not in the United Nations, sorry, in the United States, they had some laws, which are, I think they are not even the United States laws, but mostly the laws of each city separately. So like in each big city, they have their own building code, and they also have Department of Buildings. And there is a special regulation in each city, also stated in the building codes, that the Department of Building must not issue any permission to the developers who propose the construction of some high-rise building unless the developer also proposes the satisfactory demolition plan for that building. Meaning that no building in the US could be approved unless the one who proposes it also in the same time submits a plan how is going to be demolished in the future. So the main point that they should not allow the construction of the buildings that cannot be easily demolished. That's it. So the point is that before the Twin Towers, all buildings, including the skyscrapers, were not built from steel. They were built from from bricks, from concrete, from the concrete reinforced with steel, or something like that, but not with the steel. Okay, because the concrete reinforced with steel and the steel are different things. So that means before 1966, because the 1966 is the time where the Twin Towers were approved and the construction began. So before 1966, it was not very easy, but relatively easy to demolish any skyscraper using the ordinary explosives. So there were special companies that were specialized in demolishing of high-rise buildings, and it was easy to provide the demolition plan to get the approval. But it all suddenly changed in 1966 because the Twin Towers did not use any concrete. I'm not talking about the concrete that was used in the floor, thin slabs that doesn't matter, it's not counted. I'm talking about the bearing structure. So the Twin Towers were made from steel without concrete whatsoever in that sense. So from the beginning to end, they were just steel. There was like a huge, thick steel tubes, and they cannot understand how to demolish that because you can't demolish the fully steel structure with the explosives. It's not possible. The maximum what you can do, you can use a huge number of explosives at somewhere at the lower level to undercut it so that it will just fall over. So yes, you can topple the towers, but you can't demolish them nicely so that they will fall into the let's say more or less into the perimeter.
So basically,
As a,
that they it was possible to do in such fashion that it would
that they will
fall, but it
just
was
fall like that.
possible
Yes.
to do so that it would fold, like fold
No,
together.
you
Yeah.
can't do that with steel because the ordinary explosives would not allow that. It is just not possible.
So basically, it was not possible to do it in like Las Vegas fashion, where you have like when they fold like this.
It depends on the materials the building is built. If it is bricks or like a concrete slabs or concrete structure reinforced with steel, you still can do that, but not when it is just fully made of steel only, like at the Twin Towers were. So that is why they did not. I mean, they had a problem. They could not get approval of the Department of Buildings of New York in 1966 to begin the construction. So they begin to look for some special opportunities to how to demolish that, and they found that. So that we are talking about 1966. You should understand one thing, that the so-called nuclear phobia, I mean the scare of the general public of the nuclear explosions, became widespread only in the end of the 70s. Even in the beginning of the 70s, and not to say about the 60s, people were not scared much about the nuclear explosions like now. I mean, they didn't have that phobia yet. There were no hysterics about that. So
Yeah, it was
it was,
before Harrisburg, right? Which year
yeah.
Harrisburg?
If we are talking about the 60s, the nuclear explosions were widely used for not only for military purposes but also for some industrial purposes. So they used to use the underground nuclear explosion to make artificial lakes, canals, gas holders, and sometimes they use the nuclear explosion to extinguish underground fires in some gas wells, and so on. They were widely used, in fact, in both in the United States and in the Soviet Union. And there was even special agreement before between the United States and the Soviet Union regulating the usage of so-called peaceful nuclear explosions, that for non-military purposes. And this agreement you can find in the internet, is still available.
Yeah,
And according,
and the key for that agreement was like the
yeah,
thing behind it was so that one nation would not suspect that the other is about to do some sort of nuclear strike, so that they would know that the things that are happening on the other end of the earth, because you can register it with the magnitude very easily, the nuclear explosion. Of course,
it's
it
not,
was one of the thoughts behind that sort of agreements.
actually it was like this, that so-called peaceful nuclear explosion treaty, the main point of it was that they will not exceed a certain amount of such certain yield in kilotons. It was limited by 150 kilotons per individual explosion. And the main purpose was, I think, just to to not to create opportunities to test the nuclear weapons in disguise of the peaceful nuclear explosions. I would put it that way. It's not the problem of the nuclear strike, because we are all talking about underground nuclear explosions. So prior to this, the nuclear tests from atmosphere moved underground, because initially they used to test nuclear explosion in atmosphere. And after that, they made the new treaty prohibiting usage of, testing of the nuclear devices in atmosphere, in order to minimize the damage to environment. Because you know that the atmospheric nuclear explosion is quite dangerous things. For example, it can be blown by the wind, and it might affect the territory of another country which is innocent, and so on. So for some reason they decided to stop that, and all the nuclear testing move underground since then. And then they still want to control that, so that peaceful nuclear explosions treaty was made. I think the main purpose of it was to prevent this guy. Like, for example, if some country want to create, to test a huge nuclear warhead with the huge yield underground, but not in disguise of peaceful nuclear explosion. So they made the treaty that way, that each party must inform another party in advance of the peaceful nuclear explosion with their coordinates and the purpose and the yield must not exceed 150 kilotons. So that is basically like that. So that
Just two small points that I would like to add, which are quite interesting. For example, most of you probably have heard in the news about the Nord Stream pipelines explosions, and even that tiny explosion was registered by the scientists in Sweden, and it was actually them who first reported that, whoa, something has happened, because there was some small reports in the media that something is happening, but nobody knew, and then it was a Swedish geologists who broke that story. And the second thing is also the thing that Michael was describing. For example, when there was a Chernobyl accident, quite a lot of fallout happened actually in Sweden, in northern part of Sweden. So for you who are not very familiar with European geography, Ukraine is a country that is located in southeast corner of Europe, while Sweden is at the very far north. So we can imagine that this fallout traveled for X thousand miles from its origin before it actually came down.
okay, let me just say something in regard to that. So first of all, when it comes to the alleged detection of explosion in the Nord Stream pipeline, because I'm very cynical person, and I could tell you that it looks like cheating. So I do not believe that. I do not actually believe that the pipeline was exploded whatsoever, because if it were, then it will be easy to assess that. You know that people can probably move there immediately to assess damage inflicted. and this information will be published. So what we see in reality, it looks like a show. It's very similar to the Freemasonic show with the alleged leak in the Mexican Gulf a few years ago, as you remember.
Yes,
You
of course.
remember that was very shameful story when the Freemasons created a big news of the alleged oil leak in the Mexican Gulf. So they created all the needed pictures, the birds, covered with oil and so on the beach, and they make they, how this, I forget the English word. It was quite hysterical actually, and they claimed that it was like threatening the entire existence of humanity. So they call it like a extinctional level of the catastrophe. And at one point, they just stop it without explaining why. So, like for example, that Sunday they still talk about it, and from next Monday they just stop talking about it. They just close the matter without explaining to the people how it was achieved. Why it finished, why the so-called humanity did not extinct from it, and how it was stopped. They just stopped talking about it, not stopped the leak. Okay, so that means it's just like a story that was not real. And the Mexican Gulf leak, this one is a good example how they do. They start some project, but they did not bring it to the end. They just abruptly stopped talking about it, and that's it. So the so-called explosion at the Nord Stream pipeline is look very similar to the alleged leak in the Mexican Gulf. So it looks like cheating from the beginning. So if the Swedish geologist, or who they were, I don't know, seismologist, claim that they allegedly detected the explosion, that is already indication of the cheating, because you can't detect the explosion in the water by seismic means. You can only detect it by acoustic means. Like the acoustic specialists in submarines, they always listening to what is going on in the water. You know that. So if they claim that they detected the explosion by acoustic methods, then okay, we could believe that because it's reasonable. But they claim that they allegedly detected that by seismic methods, which is not possible when you explode something in the water. So this statement actually indicates that there were no explosion and it's just cheating. So in my cynical opinion, the the corrupt officials within the Russian government and the Russian state oil company and oil and gas companies or whatever got into the agreement with their American colleagues to stop the supply of the gas to Germany, because they just want to destroy the Germany. And this one looks like the joint project of England, United States, and Russia. It looks strange because Russia now is waging war in Ukraine, and they're supposed to be enemies of America and England, because in America and England helps the other side of the conflict in Ukraine. But nonetheless, they are still friendly and they can do such things. So no one should be cheated by the alleged. The things are in fact very simple. The Russian government is fully allied with not with the American government, I would say, but with those folks who push the globalization. So they are still there. It doesn't matter whether they make the war in Ukraine. It didn't change anything. They are still together. That means the Russian government still did not want to talk about 9/11. They don't want to unmask the 9/11 perpetration. So despite the war in Ukraine, they are still capable of this. So that is, we are talking about the alleged explosion on the Nord Stream pipeline. I think they just stop it and make the story. That's what I think.
Well, also,
when it comes to Chernobyl, because you also talked about Chernobyl.
Yeah.
So the Chernobyl is another story. It was another bogus event. Because actually I had a good article in English language also. That was also a chapter of my book where I explain in detail what was the Chernobyl. So the alleged radioactive fallout in Sweden, it was just a bogus also, because there was no radioactive fallout at all as a result of the Chernobyl event. It was just a bogus event in total. They just destroyed one of the reactor by a portable nuclear explosion, and the rest was just a story. So I would put
Okay.
it that way. So to comment on your statements.
Yeah. Also, there was there are quite clear matters where Russia and U.S. still continue to cooperate because, for example, despite all the war and all of this stuff, the representatives of Russian military have contact with the representatives of the United States government on regular basis, and you can actually read it in any news and media outlet. And also, actually, an interesting fact that, for example, here in Sweden, when we are creating fuel for the nuclear power stations, the event goes in such fashion that the uranium that is used here in Sweden, it is produced in Russia, but the company that handles it here in Sweden is called Westinghouse, and it's a the factories itself are outlet of ABB company. Like it was before a wing of ABB company, and now it is in operation by an American company called Westinghouse. So in Sweden, you sort of have a clear meeting of the two sides where both U.S. and Russia, that in one place are more or less are at war. In the same time, they're clearly cooperating in the field of nuclear, and they're making a lot of money from it.
Yes, of course. And also, you should understand that Russia is the main supplier of uranium to United States, and it was not interrupted. In fact, it will be increased because the main goal of Americans is to shut down several nuclear power stations in Ukraine so they can free the uranium to increase the supply to the United States.
Yeah,
Just that.
and an interesting fact that I think might be news to some of our American viewers is that during the term when Miss Clinton served in the United States government, actually, she was one of the people who pushed to sell American uranium to a company where the Russian entities have a very large stake, which is extremely interesting because it is almost impossible to find anybody who would be more hateful towards Russian government than Madam Clinton, and at the same time, she was one of the people who was behind a very large sales of the uranium companies that are in the US to Russia. Like, so we all know that uranium is a key strategic resource for any kind of modern industrial nation. And yet, at the same time, while she was speaking all over the world about how dangerous and bad Russia is, she was one of the people behind a business deal on which there is like a thousands of different corroborations where you can find that she was actually one of the people behind it. So I think it's also quite fascinating fact that is also confirmed in so many mainstream media.
Yes, it is. But it could be easily explained in this way. So many people they genuinely believe that the Russia is just like independent state, like independent sovereign state with its own interests. So when they see the enmity between the Russian Federation and the United States, they took it for something serious. But they did not understand one thing, because the actually any kind of modern state is first of all a juristic person. Like 100 years ago or earlier, there were some states that were private property of absolute monarchs. Like if there is in certain country there is an absolute monarchy, then this state is a personal property of the king or the Tsar or whatever the monarch is, if that is the absolute monarchy. Another thing is just the democracy, like in Switzerland, because in Switzerland there is basically no state, there is no even capital, there is no red dot marking the capital in Switzerland because they have no capital, because that is not a state. Okay, it is just a country populated by the free people with direct democracy. And but there are not many examples like Switzerland. It's just maybe one only. And also it is going to be finished soon because they already joined the United Nations organization from 2002 and so on. So, but if we talk about the typical modern state, like a republic, many people don't understand what the republic is. In fact, whether it is a republic or a so-called constitutional monarchy, the main point that is every state is a juristic person. Like Russian Federation is a juristic person, and Mr. Putin is a president of that juristic person. So the United States of America is a juristic person that exercise its sovereignty over the United States as a country. So like Russia as a country is one thing, and Russian Federation as a juristic person that exercises its sovereignty over Russian territory is another thing. So Russian Federation and Russia are different things. Same like the Russian Empire and the Tsar Nicholas II are different. So Russian Empire is just a territory, and the Tsar Nicholas II is the sovereign who exercises the sovereignty over this territory. The same things applies to Russia. Russia is the territory, and the Russian Federation is a juristic person that exercises sovereignty over this territory. And Mr. Putin is a president of that juristic person. It's very obvious. And almost 95% or maybe 99% of the modern states, they exist in the form of juristic persons. So now the question is, who are the shareholders of that juristic person? If we talk about the Soviet Union or the Russian Federation inside the Soviet Union, the shareholders was a communist party. Because when they kick out the Tsar and abolish the Russian Empire, they recreated the state in the form of juristic person, and the shareholder in that juristic person was a communist party. That's why, as a shareholders, they were called the ruling party. It was even written in the Soviet constitution that the Communist Party is a ruling party. Why they are ruling party? Because they are the one who organized the state as a juristic person, and they are the shareholders. So it's very obvious, okay? But it's not so obvious when it comes to the Freemasons. Because the Freemasons, when they organize the juristic state as a juristic person, they are shareholders in the same way as the Communist Party, with one exception. The Communist Party did not hide behind the curtain. They are here. They say, yes, we are communists. We are the ruling party. And that is written in our constitution, okay? But the Freemasons did not do that. They just hide behind the curtain. They are shareholders, but they not show their face. Okay, maybe they show their face only to the top management, like a president and so on.
Oh, wait. There is one part of the United States de facto government, not a government in a legal sense, but a de facto government, which is the most powerful structure in U.S. and it's called Federal Reserve System. And the Federal Reserve System is actually officially a non-state entity. So it is the most powerful part of the US government because in terms of finance and money makes the world go round, and despite them not being a state entity, they more or less control the whole United States. And there is actually a very peculiar fact that I would like to mention for our viewers, and for that matter I will refer them to multiple documents that are available on the internet. And as you probably know, Federal Reserve System was supposed to have an audit. So normally, if you have a structure which in some way cooperates with the government, you audit them regularly on a regular basis. So Federal Reserve System was not audited once since 2013, and the time when they were thinking about doing the audit was 2001. And the thing that accidentally happened, that quite a few people that were involved with that proposed audit, they mysteriously died in those events. And it was quite interesting because when a much, much smaller investigation was launched in US Congress, I believe it was bipartisan, and from the Republican side, it was Ron Paul, and one of the people who was supporting it on the Democratic side, it was Bernie Sanders. So it came around, I believe it was in 2011, so 10 years later. So regardless of what it is, if we would speculate that there were some very, very shady things that could have been going with the Federal Reserve System that were supposed to be published in 2001, a small, small part of it was published in 2011. And already then they uncovered that there were suspicious activities similar to $16 trillion, which is more than GDP of countries like, say, Germany, of countries like Japan, United Kingdom, and it would be about a half of today's American GDP. So for 10 years that they have to do something, that they could do something to, for example, if they wanted to, they could hide some sort of facts. So even after 10 years, there was still enough evidence that something very strange was going on with the American Federal Reserve System. And with that audit, they uncovered huge amounts of money, which were not going from the United States to the United States banks, but there were also very substantial cash flows that were going from America to banks in Germany, Switzerland, France, that the Federal Reserve System was not anymore functioning as an entity of US. It was already global, and it is clearly presented by the evidence that is absolutely open for the public, but for some reason nobody cares about that part of the story, and I find it extremely fascinating.
Yes, maybe. I did not pay attention to this, but I think we should learn more about it. So I cannot. I have no comment on this. But as you probably understand that because the Federal Reserve System is non-state entity, is probably privately owned even. So why don't we presume that the United States of America as a juristic person are also privately owned?
Yeah, it's
And that is
possible.
very logical. It's not possible. It's 100% so, because the Soviet Union, as I explained, and each republic of the Soviet Union separately were owned by a communist party, because the communist party, because there was like a stateless situation after the abolishing of the Russian Empire and the throne of the Tsar in Russia. So for a while there was no state at all. Same like in Switzerland or same like in Afghanistan. Okay, so the Communist Party decided to create a state in the form of juristic person. So it was the creator of the Communist Party. So of course, as the creator, as the shareholders, they hold the status of the ruling party, and they didn't even mind to write it into the constitution. So if we talk about the United States was also at one point organized in the free territory of the North America by someone. So that someone since then is a shareholder. They just don't want to show their face. So they pass their shares from father to son to grandson and so on. So the current holders of the ownership of the United States, they are probably, not probably, surely they are just descendants of those who organized it in the first instance. and they are private people, that they are not organization. So that's what I'm trying to explain, that the America is owned. I simply call that Freemasons because that is easy. Okay, so this kind of people who run states from behind the curtain, I call them Freemasons because that they are Freemasons, in fact. Even though some people try to distinguish between the Freemasons and the Illuminati and so on, I didn't go into that detail. I just make it simple, Freemasons. So, uh, if the Russian Federation before 1991 was called, has a bit different name, it was a Soviet Republic. I mean, in Russian language, I forget how to put it in English. Russian Federative Soviet Republic, something like that. So, and it was just another name for the juristic person. And that time it was owned by the Communist Party. So in 1991, the Communist Party was prohibited, and the Russian Federation as a juristic person was passed from the former owner communists to the new owners whom we don't know. But everyone with basic understanding should understand that they are the same Freemasons that run America. So it means the Russian Federation as a juristic person is owned by the same people who own the United States of America. So it means the shareholders are the same, but the political government that is elected, I mean the president, the prime minister, and the rest of the ministers, which act like the board of directors, basically. So in every juristic person, there is a council of ministers. That is basically a board of directors. And the president is a president, like in any company, because it's a company. So, but they are not the owners of the state. That's why they cannot go against the wish of the real shareholders. Like in the Soviet Union, no elected public official can go against the instructions of the Communist Party. So the Communist Party was the one who dictated to the elected officials what to do and what not to do. It is obvious. The same thing applies to the Western structure. The Freemasons, they dictate to the elected officials in the juristic person what they could do and what they could not do. So this is equally applies to Russia and to the United Nations, or to
So,
the United States. Sorry. So
so
that's why now it looks like the Russia and the United States are enemies. Yes, it looks like, but that is on the level of the political government. I mean, in the level of the public show, but deep inside, they are owned by the same people. I mean, the Russian Federation is owned by the same group of people that owns the United States as a juristic person.
and the way I remember it, you may correct me, of course, if I'm somehow not being exactly on point, but I think that there were some events which followed the 9/11 when pretty much entire sky of the United States was shut down, and yet there were airplanes with Saudi citizens which were going away from the United States. And also there are some facts about that are at least established now, that in some way there seems to be connection to Saudi Arabia, and some people are suggesting that even so at least even Saudi embassy had some sort of maybe not knowledge, but some sort of hints that some things might happen. And also the report that was released, I think, was it a couple of years ago. And in that report, there were 26 pages, which were only released 10 years after 9/11. And it was quite interesting because those 26 pages that previously were held um, seemed to be completely mundane. There was nothing unusual at all. So it's interesting. Why would they hold 26 pages if they 26 pages were pretty much meaningless? Like There was nothing important in them. So what I wonder about is, how is Saudi Arabia connected to all this? And secondly, why is this situation about the parts of the report on 9/11 with those 26 pages? Why was it held back for 10 years?
You see, actually, I can explain to you 9/11 in much detail. This I can explain also, but the problem is that it is very hard to answer this question um, being taken out of the context of the entire affair. Okay, so if I
Mm-hmm.
explain to you the entire 9/11 setup, I can easily answer this question and people
Mm-hmm.
will understand. But if I try to answer it taken out of context, I think it will be strange. So, okay, the main point is that many people mistakenly believe that 9/11 was organized by the United States government. So this one is the very wrong basic premise, and based on that, you cannot find the truth. Okay, so means once you have the wrong presumption, everything you build on top of it will be wrong automatically.
Mm-hmm.
So the main point is that the American government was not involved in 9/11, whether you like it or not, and whether the other people like it or not. It was not. The United States government was a victim of 9/11 and not an organizer. And once you step on this basis, then you can make the right conclusions. If not, if you force yourself to believe that that was the evil US government who did the 9/11, you will never find the truth because it's not possible. So the
So
main
if
point,
it if we take away U.S. government, then who was it?
okay, so the 9/11 was organized by the three parties acting together. One is the Israeli secret services. Second is the French secret services that were doing the most of visible jobs, and the one who was behind them was the Freemasons. So that three groups: Freemasons, French, and Israelis. So they
Okay.
acted together more or less. But the Freemasons stay behind the first two. So when the lay people look at 9/11, trying to analyze it, I mean, if they are a little bit higher than claiming that it was done by the evil US government, I mean, one step up. Advanced researchers, I would put it that way. They will see Israelis because the Israelis are obvious in these affairs. But that they were not alone. If you look further, you will also see French. And if you look even further, then you will see the Freemasons. But you can't see the Freemasons if you not see French first. And if you can and you cannot see French if you see the Israelis first. And if you force yourself to believe that it was done by the evil US government, you cannot see anything at all because your view is on the evil US government. But in reality, the US government, as I told you, it was innocent when it comes to 9/11. It was a victim, complete victim, a part of maybe some individual from within the U.S. government who were the Freemasons. I'm not talking about this. I'm talking about the United States government in general. So, uh, because the United States government was a victim, it was put in a very awkward situation, and it must find some scapegoat to blame that affair on, because the United States government could not blame that on Israelis, it could not blame it on French, and of course it cannot blame it on Freemasons, because the Freemasons are actually the behind the curtains owners of the United States. Okay, so the United States government could only blame itself, or it could find some other alleged perpetrators. So the easiest they could do is to blame this on Arabs who allegedly flew the aluminium planes into the steel twin towers. Okay, and because the Arabs are they selected the Arabs to be mostly from the from Saudi Arabia, then they have to get rid of the certain Saudi Arabian figures close to the United States president. You know that Osama bin Laden's father has a big company that has some business directly with Bush family. It has not. It is not connected to 9/11. It's just a business. Okay?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So, but once they decided to blame the 9/11 on Arabs, they have to cut this connection, and they have to send the Arabs away from the United States station, because if they keep them there, they will be subject to the questioning of FBI, and FBI would find that they are innocent, okay, because they are innocent. So they have to get rid of them. That is why, despite the no-fly order, they put all those Arabs into the planes and just send them away from the United Nations, or from the United States, to avoid their interrogation by the FBI.
So I wonder two things. If we would try to sort of think of some things, like for example, it seems that Ron Paul and Bernie Sanders, at least in some ways, are the people that are now explained for by some mainstream media, despite them being elected U.S. Officials. Some people are calling them now crazy because they're trying to find out more truth about what happened in 9/11. They're just asking questions. They're not telling anybody anything. They say, we need more information. You're still holding back information. Give us information. And so I wonder, for example, Mr. Trump and people who stand behind him, and also people who stand behind Ron Paul, and people who stand behind Bernie Sanders. Um, is it so that there is some kind of big fight, big struggle between two sides of the like US world, which is behind curtain or something like this? Because it seems that there are some people who at least are trying to shake this sort of system very actively. And then I wonder, is there like different groups of people? Because it does not seem to have a strict political meaning, because Bernie Sanders, he's a very well known Democrat, and Ron Paul, he's clearly Republican senator, and also Mr. Trump, he's of course Republican, and yet they seem to be passing the same sort of idea that we need more information about this event, although they're from two different parties. And then there are some people who are, for example, around Dick Cheney, Liz Cheney, and all those people who seem to be pushing for exactly opposite approach, that everything should be classified. There should be no more new information, that everything what happened then is complete, should be remain a complete secret and stuff like that. So I wonder, is there some sort of opposing fractions on this in the US?
No, I don't think so. Because I told you I'm a cynical person, okay, and according to my cynical opinion, that is these people that you mentioned, they are agents of disinformation. Because you know that there is a trick. When you have two sorts of lie, when you have only one lie, people will likely look for the truth. Because in the brains of primitive people, they just divide everything into two. So if there is a lie, then they have to look for the truth. So then the simple trick to avoid to prevent people from looking for the truth is to offer them two lies, lie number one and lie number two. So then you have choice to select between lie number one and lie number two, and then the truth is out of the menu. Okay, so you will not look for it. That is how, for example, the elections in the United States work. You can select between the so-called Democratic Party and the Republican Party. Okay, but whether Democrats or Republicans won the election, nothing will change. Nothing at all. Put it that way. Okay. So if you want to change the United States, maybe you need another party, maybe a communist party. or maybe the party of Islamic fundamentalists. But it is not there. But it is not there. You can choose only between the Republicans and Democrats. Okay, so the same thing applies to 9/11. So if the choice war between my explanation about the nuclear demolition of the World Trade Center and the ground zero name. I forgot to explain to you that the ground zero name. You know that the World Trade Center has name ground zero.
Yes, of course.
And you know that the ground zero in pre 9/11 English language has only single meaning, a place of a nuclear explosion. It has no other meaning. Okay, so we can talk about this more if you want. But basically, that if they had the choice between whether to accept my explanation about the nuclear demolition of the World Trade Center and the involvement of French, Israelis, and the Freemasons, and between, for example, the approach of Dick Cheney, who want to classify everything, then you will clearly see the lie and the truth, or the truth and attempt to hide the truth. But that is, they don't want it to work that way because it is very obvious. So instead, they just offer you another lie. So they will promote some agents of disinformation who will not talk about the nuclear demolition of the World Trade Center, who would not talk about the ground zero name. They will just talk about some stories like what you mentioned. So now you have a choice between the people who call themselves whistleblowers, or how maybe they have some name like that in the United States, and the government officials who are against them. So then the truth is out of the list. That's how it works. So that is just a disinformation.
So, what were the gains that those people who are behind it? What did they gain when the twin towers went down? What did those people gain? What was the idea behind it?
You mean who organized the 9/11?
Yeah, I mean those people. You have told us who they were, but what was the gain for them? Like, what did they win? What did they achieve by doing?
Okay, because if we talk about French, okay, let's talk about French first because that is the easy to understand. The French, they plan to retaliate against the United States for two reasons. Reason number one, they were very unhappy with Chernobyl because they knew that the Chernobyl was organized by the United States secret services. Okay, and they have to retaliate for that because France lost a lot of they lost a lot as a result of Chernobyl. You know, because the before Chernobyl affair, France invested a lot of into nuclear research and into the nuclear industry, and they plan to sell a lot of their nuclear reactor all around the world. Okay, as a result of the Chernobyl so-called catastrophe, nuclear industry in general was demonized. Okay, and the trend was to close existing nuclear powers in Europe and not to build any new. So you can't imagine how much France lost as a result of that. Okay, and they were very unhappy about this, and they wanted to retaliate against the United States for that, particularly for Chernobyl. Okay, so the best retaliation the French could do is to force the American government to make the nuclear explosions under the Twin Towers, just in the middle of New York City. So that was beautiful. From the point of retaliation, it was really beautiful, and French did it. Okay, so that is if we talk about the reasoning of French. The second, what the French wanted to retaliate for is the Concorde, because the Concorde disaster was also organized by the United States Secret Services, and the French could not accept that. They have to retaliate for that also. So what could be the best retaliation than to force the Americans to shoot down their own passenger planes? So now many people know that at least two planes were shot down: the Flight 77 that was assigned to the Pentagon and the Flight 93. that was shot down over the Pennsylvania. That is well known. I mean, for anyone who more or less understand about the 9/11. But not many people know that in reality, American government shot down 6 passenger planes. They just didn't talk about that, but it is. So totally, the American government, I mean, on the orders of the American government, there was shot down 6 passenger planes in total at that day. So that was another French retaliation, because it was also beautiful to force the American government to shoot down its own passenger planes. That was for Concord. So if enough reasoning for the French why they need to do that. Okay, so now we talk about Israelis, why the Israelis need that. Because before 2001, the Israel was already losing the public sympathy in the world. Like if you talk about the 70s or 60s, Israel was perceived as a small country that was attacked by a, a huge forces of Arab countries around it. Like 5 Arab countries attacked small Israel, and Israel won that war. So actually, if unless the people has anti-Semitic sentiment, I mean, if they are neutral, they would sympathize with Israel because it was really good of them. So the public sympathies in the 60s and in the 70s and even in the 80s, they were with Israel more than with Arabs. But during the 90s, they began already to lose the public sympathies. So a lot of people in the West, they began to sympathize with oppressed Palestinians. So by 2001, Israel almost lost its former support in the West. Not the official political support, I mean public support. So as a result of 9/11, they managed to fix that. So they after 9/11, the Arabs they begin to be perceived as a terrorists, as evil, and Israel again was perceived as a forepost of the so-called Western democracy among the wild Arabic world, something like that. So that was their main gain. And also, as a result of 9/11, the Americans were forced to attack Israeli enemies like Iraq, which was a strong enemy of Israel actually. So that was the gain of Israel as a result of that. And when we talk about the Freemasons, they advanced the globalization because they are pushing for globalization, and 9/11 is a globalization project. So as a result of 9/11, the entire world just moved a few steps further on the path of the globalization. I would put it that way.
So, in your view, what do you think the next step is for this globalization? Because as it is happening right now, we have quite a lot of nationalistic governments that are coming to power in places like, for example, Italy and a lot of other countries where there are very clearly nationalist agendas that are being put forward. And since there are some people who seem to be standing for globalization, and it's going a little bit back right now. What will be the next step to go back to globalization? What is the goals? How do you see the next step of those people who stand for globalization?
I believe that the globalization will continue as is because none of the so-called nationalistic government is against the globalization. I never see even a single government in the world today who would openly against the globalization. None. They can be as much nationalistic as they claim, but they are still do not change the path to the globalization. You see, even the Russian government that made the war against Ukraine, we still not talk against globalization.
So what would be the next, if somebody would want to stop globalization, what would be the next concrete steps? What should be done if anybody would want to stop globalization? What is the next step?
I think that the people who must stop globalization, they must be, I mean, that must be a strong personality similar to Hitler or to Stalin or to Mao Zedong, someone like that, with a clear ideology that must explain to the people what's the danger of the globalization, what is going on, how the states were losing gradually their sovereignty for the last 70 years. They have to denounce the United Nations because the United Nations organization is the main tool of the globalization. It should no longer be perceived as anything good because that is the concentrated evil. But unless someone with this kind of position will come to power, they will not change anything. And I not see any person with this kind of ideology around.
Well, yeah. As much as we can discuss the two guys that you mentioned about those three figures, so like there are a lot of different opinions on Mao. Even there are some different opinions about Stalin. But just so that I have it mentioned that um, nobody here is supporting Hitler in any way or fashion, because what he did was recognized by Nuremberg Tribunal as a crime against humanity. Anyway, it was very, very interesting to listen to what you were telling the viewers, and I very much hope that it will be an eye opener for many of them, and they will take things that are interesting for them and sort of do some of their own research, because this is what I always urge my viewers. If you don't want to believe me, or if you don't want to believe people with who I discuss something, just take those pieces of evidence that we put forward to you and go and do your own research. Just have your eyes not shut but open. Anyway, I hope it was an interesting time for you too, and I hope you enjoy our online meeting. And I'm looking very much forward to questions from our audience, and perhaps we'll meet up sometime later and try to answer them.
Okay, thank you for invitation and
Thank
goodbye.
you. It was a pleasure. Enjoy your weekend. Bye.